All right, chapter 3. And Jonathan, I don't remember who's going after me, but I'm going to hopefully, I'm going to get through page 90 today.
Hmm.
Because I hit 25 slides. And then I was like, I have to stop. It's very, very hard to talk through 25 slides. So there's where we're at. Welcome. Here's the chapter title. And in the first half of chapter 3, we don't really even get to this question yet. Hello. So God's word or human word, leave that question in your head as we're going through the stories. The first half of this chapter is mostly stories of these poor Christians who were just tortured, beheaded. I mean, it was tough to be a Christian in those first 100 years. Let's just be blunt. Okay. So she talks first about Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross. There's their pictures that I found. Hello, Teresa here. Hello, John of the Cross. So these two people were Carmelites. And I actually here's Carmelite is a religious order in the Catholic Church that follow Christ and look to live out a life of allegiance to God by offering God a pure heart and a stout conscience. Jesus, the Son of God, is our Lord, an example of how to live in this world with our fellow brothers and sisters. That sounds like that's pretty normal, right? So this is about John. He was ordained a Carmelite in 1567, and he met Teresa of Avila, who actually was the one that recruited him into this primitive rule of the Carmelites. And what they were doing is that they were underscoring that his writings were more about the outstanding. Hang on a second here. His prose works are outstanding and underscoring the cost of discipleship, the path of union with God, rigorous discipline, and the purification. And so he is the patron saint of mystics in as part of Spanish poets. And so it was their zeal, let's say, that kind of got them in trouble with the Orthodox Church, because they were mystics and then they were really, really focused on that personal relationship with God and Christ. And so you got to remember, in the beginning of Christianity, all of the Christians were trying to figure out how to worship God. How, what is the best path? And so this particular order was going along, like for Teresa of Avila, she talks about in her writings the ecstatic mystical experiences. And we're going to talk about that all through today, because ecstatic mystical experiences is part of our Christianity today. We've got Pentecostals, we've got, in our own tradition, we've got, I mean, you look at who Joseph Smith was, and it was all about, present day prophecy, present day revelation, which kind of blew the minds of all the Christians when Joseph Smith was saying it. But it's actually in every Christian faith. And this mystical experience started very, very early in the young Catholic churches. And so these two were really looking at what that ecstatic mystical experience was. And when Teresa of Avila wrote about it as 4 stages in the ascent of the soul to God: mental prayer and meditation, the prayer of quiet, absorption in God, and ecstatic consciousness. That's kind of interesting. That ecstatic word is a word that Elaine Pagels writes quite a bit in this chapter. So we'll talk about the difference between, we have a lot of spiritual practices that I kind of push everybody on, and is that an ecstatic experience? I don't know. I think it's going to have to be, each of us kind of decides for ourselves what that definition is and what our personal journey is in terms of relationships. So Christian mystics have a counterpart in both the Jewish and the Muslim faith. And what Elaine Pagels is saying is that John and Teresa and most of these early mystics were very careful with their writings and with their teachings not to identify themselves with God. And that's where we'll see that the Book of Thomas takes it one step further, and some other people take it one step further, and of course, poor John and Teresa were still condemned as heretics. So, it was really hard to get it right in the beginning of Christianity, because there was just so much turmoil. And you got to remember that anytime, I mean, you'll see later that the non-Christians were torturing them, and then the Christians were torturing each other. I mean, it was just really, really tough time to be a Christian.
Showing the love of Christ.
Yeah. I know. I'm gonna be a martyr. Okay, beheaded. It's like, I don't know.
But it was it too early, because it was also tough being a Jew and Muslim
Well,
when the Crusades started.
yeah, that's true. And one of the things that Pagels talks about is that the Romans were calling them atheists because they only believed in one God. It's like, okay, that's a different definition of atheism. I'm sorry.
They didn't believe in the Roman gods.
Exactly.
So
you need to believe in all of these gods, or else you're an atheist. So I thought that was interesting that the non-Christians were calling Christians atheists. So the Orthodox Christians at this time, they did not deny the affinity between God and ourselves, but they discouraged that process, which people may seek God on their own. And we've talked about that a lot in our history of Christianity, is that, from early on, they established the Pope, they established that everything's going to be in Latin. They established that you needed to go to church and pay your alms. And what's that? I always forget the word where you pay in order to get into heaven.
Didn't it start with an I?
Indulgences. Thank you. Indulgences. So, when you set up a church where you've got that hierarchy, then the leaders are discouraging people from seeking God on their own, but I find it kind of fascinating that from the beginning of Christianity, people were still doing it, certain monks were still doing it, and certain monks were encouraging people to do it. They just got their heads cut off most of the time about it. So I wanted to ask the question early on for who we are now. Here we are at Community of Christ. We're all sitting at Mission Road Congregation. And I think that we can say that our church and we encourage each other to have that personal relationship with God, that we seek God on our own. I don't think our leaders discourage it. I think that, obviously with present day prophecy, Joseph Smith has got himself into trouble with too many people trying to prophesy for the church. So he had to come in and say, no, I'm the one speaking on behalf of the church. But, even today, we have to kind of deal with prophecy and different kinds of relationships that people have with God. So what is your opinion about this question, Matt?
I'm just going to say that, yes, we encourage people to develop their own relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes we take a wrong turn.
Mm-hmm.
We think we're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the community comes to kind of steer you back to the right course.
Okay.
And I was going to say about ecstatic. To me, ecstatic means it's like the whirling dervishes.
Okay.
To me, it's more active and speaking in tongues and all that stuff.
Yeah, I wondered.
Dancing down the aisles like they do in some of the.
Yeah, that's the Pentecostal. That's definitely the Pentecostal. I've never been to a Pentecostal church. Have you guys been to one?
I have.
Is it that wild?
I have played for Grace Cathedral several times. It's a beautiful big church.
Yeah.
Up at on North 35, 435.
Okay.
And they are pretty staid. The only thing that was kind of a little taken aback by the, okay, but when they sing, they do this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's about
There's
it.
I've been.
Well, when I was in Zion's League, we went to a Pentecostal service one time. I don't know who came up with it, but, and yes, they were dancing down the aisles and they were,
Mhm.
they didn't do that when they sang, I don't think, but they were definitely more ecstatic in their
Well, and that's how a lot of
worship.
black churches are. They want to, if they
I
don't,
wouldn't call that ecstatic, though. I would call that just active, they just like to talk and, I mean, to me, ecstatic is more about the experience of tongues, like you're saying.
Well,
I went with a friend, high school, to one in Chicago. We sat in the balcony and the service was kind of normal. And then they had what do they call it?
altar call.
Altar call. And that's when it got really weird. And I sat and watched it. I'm sure my mouth was wide open. And my friend, she kind of went to church on her own. Her dad didn't go to church, so she just kind of found this on her own. And she kind of, after a few minutes, she kind of hit me on the shoulder. But this is where I usually leave. And I said, I'm ready. It was a little weird.
Isn't that weird?
My only experience was Pentecostal church in Africa. And I didn't feel uncomfortable there at all. It was very audience participation. There was a lot of interaction. The minister was an anesthesiologist friend of mine, and a lot of participation back and forth between him and the congregants. And then when they did do the altar call, it was for people to come up and he prayed for them silently. It was not weird or anything like that. Pretty much everybody was.
You were healed.
Yeah. I had that one funny experience. The anesthesiologist that I went with, who's been a good friend of mine for many years. The first time we were invited, I couldn't go. Getting ready to do a presentation the next day, so he went by himself, and he came back and he came to my room and he says, and he's Catholic. And he said, you knock on the door, he says, Paul, I think I've been saved.
It was some kind of experience.
Great.
Well, so, I mean, even in our own church, I mean, the Bennetts know this. I went to junior high camp with their daughter years ago. And we have had pockets of real Pentecostals in our religion. It was kind of that mystic experience thing. I mean, we've had all these different levels of it. And I don't remember where these ladies were from. I don't think the congregation is still in existence, but they did some things that week that I've never seen in our own religion before. And it actually honestly made me mad because it was a bunch of teenagers that they were experimenting with. They had a 12-year-old up in front of us in one of our religion classes. And the 12-year-old, they said, he's the prophet. And then they said, prophesy. And this poor kid is sitting there and he starts, I don't know what he said. I mean, he just starts talking, kind of gibberish.
yeah,
And it's like, really? And I just yelled at the pastor. I yelled at the director. I'm like, no. We don't experiment with teenagers, young minds like this. And so that's where I hit my limit, where it's like, okay, I will listen to adults and what they have decided with speaking in tongues and all of this ecstatic stuff. I'll listen to their viewpoints, but when it comes to our children, nope.
you were there.
Well, I didn't make them happy, but I shut it down.
Can I say one thing real quick? I brought this book. This is a compilation of all of the Gnostic Gospels from the non-comedy discovery. I thought I'd just pass it around if anybody wants to take a glance.
Thank
There's
you.
a lot, obviously.
Wow, that's a big book.
I was gonna say, Jane, my dad was an appointee and he was 70 at the time and we moved around quite a lot. And I think one of his jobs was to go around and kind of put out the fires of those kind of behaviors. And
Oh, I
try to
bet.
get
Yeah.
them kind of
That was in the
back to the
70s.
fold.
Yeah.
Because some of them were kind of weaving off into different things.
Waking up.
One of the pastor's wives was using literally a crystal ball.
Oh.
And, you know, there were others where there were a child prophet, you know.
Yeah.
You know, so I saw a lot of the edgier stuff like
Yeah.
that as a kid.
Yeah.
My folks tried to keep it away from us,
But-
you know, we were aware of it.
And my point today is that it is in every religion, and it is from the beginning of religion. You know, I mean, this is this balance that leaders and that, you know, I think we as leaders now need to be aware of where that goes. And what you were saying earlier, Coral, you know, I do think it's the community, and I think that the main thing that as I have grown into my own
Mhm.
spirituality is we need to teach discernment.
Yeah.
You know, because if you don't have if you don't discern whether it's from God or whether it's from human,
Yeah,
then that's when a religion gets itself in trouble.
but
You know,
still, you sometimes
it's
follow
hard.
a path that
Oh,
you
yeah.
think is the correct path, and you need somebody to talk you back from the edge.
Well, and what Elaine Pagels is saying is that this has been the struggle from the beginning of Christianity, you know, and so she's talking in this chapter about how the Orthodox religion shut down these people, you know, and unfortunately it was a pretty violent time in our world, and you know, the way to solve conflict is to cut off a head, you know, which is
Or
like,
burn them
well,
at
that
the
Burn them in
stake.
those states.
seems a little
Yeah.
extreme, you know.
Well, the difference between that and the contemplative life, I see you got Thomas Burton up on the slide there.
Yeah,
You know, this is a person, and these are people who are struggling, practicing to listen to God.
Yeah.
As opposed to speaking for God. I think anytime
right.
people are claiming to be speaking for God,
Yeah.
you know, be cautious.
Yeah.
But we all need to be more contemplative and spend more time listening
Yeah.
to God. I think that's important.
Yeah, it's trying to figure out where that fine line is, you know. Do you speak on behalf of God, or are you so in tune with God that what you're saying is, you know, like we believe in our present day prophet, you know, whenever he speaks for God, this is what Community of Christ agrees to follow. I mean, this is why we're here, you
But we
know.
vote on it. There are some people
I know.
who might vote that it is.
I know. But so I mean, it's just always that spectrum to kind of be aware of. I put up Thomas Merton here because he's actually what, in the 40s and 50s? You know, he's kind of
1968.
1968. Okay.
40, 50.
So he's one of these contemplatives of a more modern version of what, you know, what Elaine Pagels is kind of going through a list of all of these mystics, you know. And so she calls him a theologian, mystic, poet, social activist, scholar of comparative religions. And one of the reasons, you know, I have a personal reason to bring this guy into today's, well, Elaine Pagels mentioned him, but I have actually gotten to know this particular monk because my 30-year-old nephew, who doesn't attend a church regularly, loves Thomas Merton. And he just throws books at me, you know, all the time. He's a big reader. And I realized that the reason why is because Thomas Merton was a Christian. Connor, just like me, comes from the Christian faith, but he also explores these interfaith, you know, he explores Buddhism, he explores Eastern religions, and he brings to Christianity this different kind of mysticism that at least some, I mean, I'm talking about my 30-year-old nephew here, some of our young people are really touched by, you know. So I just think it's valuable for us to be considering these kinds of theologians, you know, and what they do for the younger people. We're always talking about how do we reach out to the younger people in our world, you know. Well, they're a little different than us. They think differently than we do. So Thomas Merton is one of those people that I want to encourage people to read. So even some devoted Christians have found that the impulse to seek God overflows the banks of a single tradition. I thought this was an important question for us to ask ourselves today. You know, I mean, we are living in a tradition. You know, we're kind of lucky in a way because Joseph Smith set us up to always be seeking for more than just, you know, the confines of the Bible. You know, I mean, Joseph Smith said to his people from the very beginning, God is speaking to me, and God goes beyond the Bible, you know, and so I think that gives us freedom, and it also, you know, becomes an issue for us. Obviously, over the years, we've lost a lot of people because of them not agreeing with certain prophecies, that kind of thing. But it also kind of gives us permission. And is Eloise here? Where'd she go? Well, I know that Eloise has been a part of a, you know, for years and years, she was a part of a women's group that, you know, explored their traditions together. And even where she lives now, you know, she gets together with the ladies at the lunch table, and they come from very, very different traditions. And I find that in my own journey very, very helpful. You know, I mean, I love to explore, you know, my friends who are pretty much pagans, and my friends who are Catholic, and my friends who are Buddhist, because it just in my own journey, it kind of helps me understand my own personal relationship with God. And I wondered, are we all thinking that same way? Um, are there the good and the bad of that? I just kind of wanted to open that question up for you guys.
Sorry, restate your question.
The question is, what do you feel about this statement? Let me just make it simple. What do you think about that impulse to seek God beyond our own tradition? Is that part of your journey? What do you think of that particular statement?
Well, I took a couple of history of religion. I guess you could also call it kind of comparative, where the first one was religions of the world. And
Yeah.
So we dealt with even, you know, the indigenous religions,
Mm-hmm.
as well as, you know, some of the major ones. We had, and in both classes, we had to go to a service that was not of our background. So the first time I went to the Buddhist temple service down on the plaza. And the second time I went to the Muslim service, there's a Muslim temple, I don't know, somewhere farther away in Overland Park. Now, the Muslim service wasn't as meaningful to me because I don't speak Arabic. And so the service was sort of like Arabic with English thrown in. But I got the gist of it. It was honoring your mother, that your mother is 7 times your best friend. And so therefore you have a sacred duty towards your mother. If your mother tells you to drop something and come down, you're supposed to drop something now, no matter what you're doing.
I'm okay with that lesson. That's a good lesson. How is it affected you now doing that?
It kind of opens up the channels that, well, I found Buddhism a little bit more meaningful because it was talking about, it took me a long time to figure out Buddhism. But it just kind of helped me expand my own relationship with God, I think.
That's what Thomas Merton said. That's
Yeah.
exactly what he said. It's interesting.
Yeah, I guess in my sermon today, I'll be touching on a little bit about diversity versus unity, uniformity. And I think it's helpful to start with your own tradition, and then you can look at others, appreciate similarities and differences.
Mm-hmm.
What I think has been the trap that the liberal West, and I mean, I'm a part of that, no matter what my beliefs might be, but one of the traps is we become a monoculture. Just think about like McDonald's, it's in every country now.
Mm-hmm.
And so we become this kind of melting pot, and we're like, okay, you know, we all basically believe the same thing, right? It's like, well, yes and no. And I think, you should be able to appreciate the differences and
Yeah, I don't want to be a monoculture. I think the melting pot idea was so that people could come in and have their own religion. I mean, I'm big into those guys who wrote the Constitution, and separation of church and state meant something very specific to them. It meant that their king was not going to tell them how to worship,
Do you think the term melting pot has changed to more of a stew?
Yeah,
Because a melting pot means we all become the same.
Yeah.
We're all
that is
blended
true. I
into
mean,
something.
that's a good point.
But
That's a
a
danger.
stew
I'm glad you're
allows
pushing
you to
that.
come in with, unique viewpoints
Mhm.
and things like that. So historically, I think the term has shifted.
Mhm.
Because I think when they first created that concept, they were trying to get people to become one country, because it was a new country. But
Yeah.
now it's like, you need that, you need the seasoning.
Yeah,
You need
Yeah,
to
yeah.
have that.
how do you be an American and have that unity versus also,
And you will find that
honoring the diversity?
Immigrants often have so much more of a passion to be a patriot than us who have been here.
Yeah.
We just take it for granted.
Yeah.
Kind of an interesting view.
I like that as too.
We want to taste all the flavors though. That's good.
And
So-
learn about
But-
it. And I think we can when we have our grounding, but then we explore other areas. I worked with a gal from India, and we would have long conversations about different things, and I learned so much from her, from her worldview.
Yeah.
We have to do that. We
Yeah,
need to do that.
yeah. So Pagels talks about how the traditional argument that some scholars, I think whenever you look at scholars, every scholar has kind of a viewpoint too. We all have to decide where we're coming from, from our scholarship viewpoint kind of a thing. And some say that, like science, I'm glad Paul is here. Jeremy, you scientist people tell me what you think about it. Like science, Christian history, it the weak false ideas die off early, while the strong and valid ones survive. And Pagels pushes back against that. And she says, well, considering that in the first 100 or 200 years, which was a critical time for these diverse ideas, the Christian traditionalists, the Orthodox Church, just squashed those challenges as to what the belief systems should be. And so she kind of challenges it like, well, it's not that the weak false ideas died off, they got killed, So there's a difference in her mind in that. So I kind of wanted to throw that out there it's like, is there a Darwinian equivalent to religion? I think that's the question.
I don't know if that's going on today. Because you have people who are turning weak and false ideas becoming a tribal thing, maybe. And
I
maybe
think
it's
they're
not
always
religion.
always
it
gonna
may be
pop up. Yeah.
cultural.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't see it as like science. I think that's why I kind of wanted to throw it out there for my scientist friends. It's like, I think with religion, as with philosophy and things like that, it always has to be an open debate. Where science, you have those, very objective testing, and you can say, for maybe not for sure, but 99% sure. Nobody's ever 100%. Yeah,
Yeah, but all of good science is peer reviewed.
right. That's
I
true.
don't think she's saying that in science, the weak and false ideas, well, in science, I do believe the weak and false ideas do die off. I mean, the history of science is, you know, you keep repeating the experiment until you figure it out and then you go on to the next thing. And so the things that, you know, we can't observe or don't work, we discard.
Mhm.
So I think science progresses that way. I think maybe what I'm taking from this is you can't say the same thing about Christian history or religion. Now, I don't like to try to mix religion and science. There are people that try to rationalize the two together, and I don't believe there's a good way to do that. And I think that's why, you know, a lot of scientists are atheists, you know, quite frankly, like 90% of, you know, true scientists.
Einstein wasn't. an atheist.
What's that?
Einstein wasn't an atheist.
Well,
One of the greatest minds.
yeah, so he's
Yes.
one, but I'm just saying today, many scientists are atheists.
And Darwin wasn't.
Yeah, whereas I think people, you know, that are highly religious cling to beliefs, whether somebody, you know, you can't disprove to somebody who's sold on their beliefs that better way to believe. It's very hard to do that.
Right.
But if you're, you know, if you're a true scientist and somebody else comes up with a different result than what you have, then those two should be able to figure it out, find what the real answer is. I mean, Dorothy, am I speaking incorrectly about that?
No, that,
Science is a process of
I
repeating
agree with that. Well,
observations
take,
until we
take,
get it right.
take William Harvey. I mean, what a great example. He proved that blood circulates. And for centuries, Galen, the great anatomist and physician, said that the blood goes through, it just kind of goes back and forth. It doesn't circulate
Mm.
because there are septa or some that there are holes in the part which he never could find. And so it goes from the that's why I like that ventricle, which of course it doesn't. And Harvey proved this unequivocally. And so
So that died, so all of the earlier ideas died off and we're done with that. That's what Paul was saying.
Sometimes it's a rough go
yeah,
for proving that.
There you go.
Scientists
There
keep
you go.
it dogmatic. Oh, yeah. There have been scientists that refused or would not accept somebody's theory. Took a long time to convince them. Some
Oh,
of them
yeah.
never were.
Oh, yeah.
But it's, you know,
We
it's
still
like,
see it today.
I know.
Eventually, they-
COVID.
the better idea prevailed.
yeah, look at
Yeah.
the history of flight from the Wright brothers to sending somebody to the moon. You know, that's the progress of science, and if we kept doing the wrong things over and over, we would still be flying a Wright brothers plane. You know,
Did you guys?
but the fact is, you know, progress is being made and new ideas are being introduced and studied and demonstrated to be better than what the old idea was.
Even the Wright brothers didn't get everything very right.
Oh, they really did.
The wing warping thing was their big deal, and nobody does that
Yeah,
anymore.
but what I'm saying now, it's much, you know, we're
Yeah.
much more inclined to want to get on an airplane and fly from here to California or whatever than we would, you know,
Yeah.
get on the Wright brothers plane and fly across the
Yeah.
field. I don't know if you're gonna make that.
Yeah.
I saw yesterday on the internet, on Facebook, thing says, I've learned so much from my mistakes. I think I'm gonna make some more.
And you guys have, you know, Bob Newhart was one of my favorite comments. And you guys have to go Google Bob Newhart talking to the Wright brothers and trying to set up a airline with them. And he basically says to them, well, it's gonna be tough to have to land every 15 minutes to get across the country. So,
Yeah,
Well, getting back to the other side of it, I think is kind of a power thing. It doesn't have to do with evidence or not. It's who's got the more powerful
Yes.
voice.
right,
So I
That's
don't
what
think
Pagels
that's
says.
necessarily, that's not science at all. That's just
Yeah.
who's got the bigger, you know.
yeah,
voice.
yeah. Yeah, it's religion,
Theology isn't really evidence-based like
no,
No,
science. I mean, that's
yeah.
a totally different realm of who you are.
Religion is usually about, you know, when we look at the Bible, both the Old and the New Testament, it's gonna be about which ideas prevailed in power, you know? I mean, it really is about who won, you know? that kind of a thing.
Well,
You know?
the age of practice of what was called rhetoric, which is being able to make an argument without evidence and convince somebody just because your words sound like they might be right.
Well,
It's called
yeah.
sophistry.
Sophistry, yeah.
I was gonna say that's kind of how the Bible was compiled. It
Oh, yeah.
wasn't,
Absolutely. We'll talk about that a little bit here. I mean, it's interesting I'm sorry, all my names are all mixed up in my head. I'll think of them again. Irenaeus,
Irenaeus.
yeah. He's the one that was he was pushing the book of John, and he was the one that was kind of looking at those lists that were starting to come around in order to create the New Testament. So it was all about rhetoric and what people were kind of arguing for.
Now, I personally, to just jump in, I see a lot of that dynamic, the power play, the struggle for power, the tug and war, or just the powerful dominating the weak. But I think to boil all of human history down to that is a little bit simplistic. It's kind of a Marxist view.
Not
It's all,
human history, Christianity. We're only talking about Christianity.
oh,
We're saying Christianity. What is the path of Christianity? Is
mhm.
it fair to say that about the path of Christianity?
Good question.
Yes and no.
Okay.
Do you think orthodoxy would fail the constant?
I don't think so. No,
Or would it take
because
a
the
while?
Romans were the ones that had the most power back then, you know? And so when we're talking about the first 100 to 200 years, it was
Of course,
struggling.
Constantine wasn't in the first.
I know. He wasn't until what, 300, what year? 300 something. That's what I mean, though. The Romans were the powerful ones. I mean, it's kind of surprising that they lasted that long. I mean, they were really struggling.
Yeah, well, I guess the other question is, if the Romans were so powerful, why aren't we worshiping Roman deities today?
Because Constantine on his deathbed became a Christian. That's what he was asking about.
Well, it's interesting to consider the role of martyrdom too in all of this, because it was almost like a badge of, being a great Christian if you got yourself martyred. You think with people being killed off like that, pretty quickly everybody would say, I don't want to do this. But that wasn't the case. I mean, it actually seemed to promote the growth of Christianity because of how dangerous it was. And that tells you a little bit, I think, about the human mindset, that if you've made up your mind about something, you're going to carry it through to literally to the very end. I'm astonished sometimes in thinking about all the people that gave their lives for, the things that they believed,
Oh, yeah.
very willingly and very readily.
Yeah.
Talked about a couple of them
Yeah,
that were.
yeah, we're gonna talk
stake
about
and like that.
maybe.
Yeah. I mean, it was a badge of honor
Yeah.
then, I mean, one guy, the story was that I don't know if he was an advocate for them or whatever, but he wasn't a Christian until he started arguing on their behalf, and the Roman official says, "Are you a Christian too?" And he's like, "Well, I guess I am." he dies with them, It's like, okay, dude, So yeah, it is interesting that this journey that they went on early. So she throws out a lot of different people and their journey. And it's just, to me, it's kind of interesting because we've got this Tertullian guy who he was a polemic against Gnosticism. He coined the phrase, he coined the whole Trinity concept. But see, he taught that the Son and the Spirit were subordinate to God, which was also later rejected, and he became a heretic. And so I just find it the path of these brilliant men, I mean, and women. Let's just talk about that. I mean, these people are kind of establishing for Christianity, what does this mean? What are we doing? But he was ridiculing these non-Christians because this is where they were saying that remember, we've talked about it before, where when we have the communion, that we're killing and eating children, that's what it means to have to eat the body of Christ or whatever. I mean, and he's just like, come on, And so there's just so much vitriol between these groups early on in this. This is 155 to 220 CE.
We still have those people today,
Oh,
accusing the Democrats of killing and eating children.
yeah, that was a weird one. I agree.
Well, never
Must
mind.
have
I'm not gonna step into that one.
Must have read into these guys.
Been around forever, because I know,
Yeah,
I mean, honestly, I felt that same kind of thing directed at us and our religion. Because women in,
oh,
and so, it's
Well,
not
if you said-
necessarily political.
All right,
Jeremy?
a lot of people have asked me over the years, are you Christian? It's like,
Yeah,
what do you mean am I Christian? Because they don't know anything about the Mormon faith. They don't know anything about RLDS and Communion of Christ. So I have to like explain to them, we don't worship Joseph Smith. So, it's always an issue. Yeah. So, we've got Saint Justin Martyr. Is that right? That's what his name was, right?
Mhm.
He was, what is that word? I gotta get rid of Jonathan. How do I get rid of Jonathan?
Mhm. First Christian.
First Christian philosopher. Oh yeah, because he followed Plato's teaching. So he's kind of one of those early Christians remember this was during Plato's heyday, and so a lot of Christians were saying, we can't, Plato is the opposite of Christianity, belief versus logos kind of a thing. And St. Justin Martyr and a lot of philosophers after him really have developed the study of logos and what that means from that philosopher standpoint into Christianity. So he kind of started that path. And of course he was beheaded. Yeah, because for him what he was doing. So poor dude. So then we've got this guy named Celsus, which I couldn't find a picture of because we don't have his work in the original Greek. We have a Latin version of it called The True Word. And we really know him because of what Origen said about him. And so what he was speaking against Christianity. He was one of these people that was going down that path of calling them, atheists and, horrible people. So here's what Tertullian wrote. The more we are mown down by you, the more we multiply. The blood of Christians is seed. So what Elaine Pagels is telling us about in this chapter is that she's seeing all of this diversity from all of the priests and monks kind of arguing with each other about what does Christianity mean. And then they were getting mown down by the non-Christians, and they were still going. And so the Christian leaders were desperate to figure out a way to unify their religion. This is where they were talking about this pronounce it again,
Oh, Irenaeus.
Irenaeus said, how do we become a true Catholic church? Small c, Catholic church, that means universal. So Polycarp was the teacher of Irenaeus. I don't know why I can't say it. Somebody else say it. Irenaeus. So Polycarp lived during, look at when he lived. He lived during the time when the book of John was written. And so he says he met this John. And so, yeah, it was, I didn't see the word teacher. Did you see that in the chapter? Okay. But yeah, so what Irenaeus is saying in most of his works is Polycarp had it right because he got it straight from the source. This is kind of that direct source type of a thing. So all of his criticisms of these people going, like Teresa of Avila and these other people who have different types of mystical experiences is no, you need to get it from the book of John because that person knew Jesus, and it's like you have to go to the direct source. So
He
this
had
was,
footnotes.
yeah, this was Irenaeus as our. So, Polycarp taught that to become Catholic, we must reject all deviance. And so there's the question of what it means. This is, is it God speaking or is it man speaking? This is the dilemma that, they had back then and we have now. Is it God speaking? Is it man speaking? So we've got lots of stories in this chapter about these horrors, and so we've got the horrors of John the Disciple. There was a story about John the Disciple that kind of surprised me. I don't remember it being in the Bible. Sorry, I forgot. Anybody remember that story of John the Disciple? Who's got a better memory of the chapter than me? Anybody?
I just somebody heard about Polycarp.
Okay, so what Polycarp passed down to Irenaeus is that we need to reject these people who are going to corrupt the truth. And the truth is what comes from the book of John straight to Polycarp, straight to Irenaeus. So this is their argument. So you remember this guy Marcion. I went back and looked at him because we studied him before in the history of Christianity. And this is where that word demiurge came up. Marcion was the one that actually coined that phrase. And so he was saying that demiurge was the lower jealous tribal deity of the Old Testament, and who is altogether different than the God that Jesus taught, this universal God of compassion. But Polycarp, because Marcion went to that level of two gods, Old Testament God, New Testament God, Polycarp called him the firstborn of Satan. So it's like, okay, there's the big argument. I find it interesting that we just read a book where we've gone through the Bible now with our Community of Christ author, and of course we agreed with some of them, disagreed with other parts. But if you look at the Bible and you look at all religions, there's a lot of tribal deity type of teachings in the Old Testament, and we've had to kind of grapple with the nature of God from how we've looked at the Bible. I found it kind of fascinating that's what Marcion was saying. If you look at the Old Testament, there's a lot of jealous tribal deity stuff going on with God. I mean, he was kind of angry a lot of times. Yes, there was love. We've been learning that too. The Jewish God wasn't just all about anger.
But
But he was
tell them
tribal.
to kill a lot of people to get their land.
Well, and the Old Testament was establishing that
Yeah.
there is one God. I
Yeah.
mean, this is kind of what that battle was. I mean, obviously, it was a battle all the way up until the Roman times, because it was such a strong religion to have all of those multiple gods. I mean, they're calling Christians atheists, for goodness sake, because they just have one God. And so this is where I kind of want to just point out that's where Marcion was coming, and that was clearly they did not like each other. So this is where that statement comes, where Irenaeus believed he practiced true Christianity because of his link to Polycarp, who had the link to John the Disciple.
Yeah.
And so Irenaeus was the one saying, he was the one that first championed the Gospel of John to be linked to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the Synoptic Gospel. And I thought it was kind of interesting that this guy, Tatian, he tried to rewrite the Gospels and to kind of merge them all. He tried to do that. Right. Well, that is what Irenaeus argued. He said, no, they need to stay intact. But he also said, and this is where we get into this issue of that these are the four formed gospels. These four, they constitute the whole gospel. And that's why he was pushing back a bit against these mystics who were talking about what God was saying to them personally, because Irenaeus was saying, no, we need to go to the original source. You know, the original source was the book of John, was these three gospels. Look at that, and that's where you go. So he started kind of that concept of that's what true Christianity is. Oh, not a very good picture. Sorry. It was supposed to be ecstatic people.
Okay.
No heads.
Sorry. I thought it looked bad last night, and I'm like, oh, okay. So this group of people came along. This is called Montagism. They called it the New Prophecy, and it gained a lot of followers. So these three, I think two of them are women. Women, Maximilla and Priscilla are women. Montanus is a man. Is that correct? They call them the three. So this is where we're getting into more of that ecstatic prophesizing, frenzy, raving, speaking in tongues. Some critics said that they were demon possessed because they claimed that they spoke as God. Maximilla said, do not listen to me, but to Christ. I am compelled, willing or not, to come to know God's gnosis. You know, so this is where that they're crossing that line. They're crossing that line to say, I know God personally better than everybody else. Listen to me. And so there was just all kinds of arguments where people would show up at their church services and try to disrupt them because this movement was trying to speak for God outside of what the Bible was telling them. And I'll get to it in a minute, but you know, Irenaeus really struggled with this because all through the Bible, we've got spiritual visions and ecstatic type experiences. So he's not going to reject it completely. He's got to figure out a way to harmonize, you know, what the Bible is telling people is possible to do versus what these people are doing, which is taking them off into left field with their prophecies. You know, I mean, it's a really fine line. It's really hard. So Priscilla, I had to throw in the sentence that Priscilla claimed Christ appeared to her in female form. It's interesting to me.
It's a really fun time to put the worship schedule together in those days, you know.
It's like, woo, everybody's speaking for God. You know? So some members of the new prophecy claimed that the Spirit's presence among them fulfilled what Jesus said in the Gospel of John. And I wanted to bring this up because we have used this scripture a lot in our church. I will send you the advocate, that Spirit of truth, who will guide you into all truth. And later on in John, it says, you will do greater things than I. I mean, how many times have we talked about that? Forever, you know? And so here we are in churches today. You know, it's kind of, you know, obviously this whole chapter is about how do we discern between what is God and what is man, you know, but it's really hard when you've got in the Gospel of John that I will send you the Spirit of truth that will guide you. But each one of us individually says, well, I've got it, you know, and then somebody else says, no, you don't. So it's hard. I mean, I just think it's the same struggle in religion from the beginning. So this is where Irenaeus was pointing out, you know, there's all kinds of places in the Bible where, you know, I mean, Jesus, this is one of the most beautiful parts of the Bible is when Jesus comes out of the waters of baptism, sees the heavens part, and the Spirit descends as a dove. You are my beloved Son, with you I am well pleased. I mean, that's this beautiful vision that we use in service after service after service, that this is what Jesus saw. And so, you know, then there's all these, I'm not going to be able to read these scriptures, but there's all of these different examples in the New Testament of these visions that people had. And obviously Paul, look at Paul's conversion. That was a vision that we believe happened. So there we go. Enable you to do greater things than I. That's John 16:13. Don't we quote this scripture all the time? making my own little comments and.
Mhm.
So then we've got that many Christians then and now believe that the same John who wrote the Gospel of John wrote Revelation. And so that's all that is all about an ecstatic experience. I mean, Revelation is a vision, it is a bizarre vision. It's one of these, it is whoever wrote it in an ecstatic spiritual state. And that is in our canon of scripture, and obviously we've talked about it many times, how it is a very, very difficult book to understand, because over the years it's meant different things to different groups, because it was from this personal ecstatic state that he was in. So we're not gonna go down that road, but it's just tough.
I was gonna say, do you think that people at the time Revelation were written understood those, or the illusions,
I don't know.
better than we do? Because
I think probably.
Yeah, there were some
I
references.
don't really see why anyone was writing for us. 2000.
Mhm.
I think it's like the news of people much closer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what Dempsey taught me in that book that we just read, whenever you're really truly looking, he was putting history with those writings,
Yeah.
and there were many times when it made more sense that they were actually talking about their world, so that actually makes sense to me. That it's not necessarily about 2024, but it's obviously it's a very difficult.
because I mean, we got these things with many heads, and we've got,
Yeah. Or horses on the apocalypse. All
Yeah.
that good stuff.
We
So-
know we talk about things, then and now, and a lot of it's the same. Isn't there an old saying that there's nothing new under the sun? That, we just basically are repeating the same things over and over, just with a little different.
I have to say, I think it's a song.
Well, yeah,
Ecclesiastes
the birds
says it.
stole it.
So Paul, I had forgotten that Paul talked about his vision about being caught up in paradise, and but he said that he saw and heard things that he could never tell us, and this is kind of what Thomas said in the Gospel of Thomas too. It's like, I just find that interesting, since there were things that no mortal man is allowed to speak. So so a lot of our visionaries, they'll see something and they'll say, oh, but I can't tell you about it.
I think Latter-day Saint Church, Joseph Smith used to say that I have much to share with you, but you cannot bear it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have this secret, but you're not ready.
Yes.
Mhm.
Paul said that. Joseph Smith said that. Thomas said that, but then Pagels writes that it's like, well, John decided to write them all down. So
I guess I respect those that say I had this ecstatic vision and I can't possibly put it into words because it defies words,
yeah,
versus those that say, oh, you just couldn't handle it.
right.
It's like, all right, show me the
okay.
receipts. Show me the
Exactly.
receipts.
It's like, really, you can handle it, but I can't. Try me. So, this is the question, that keeps popping up in this chapter. Who can tell the Holy Spirit when to stop? Or, as Irenaeus questioned it, who can say whether the Holy Spirit has stopped? So this was his struggle. So this is where Elaine Pagels asks that, can we still receive direct revelation from God? Well, that's an easy answer for us sitting in this room, isn't it?
Well, she made a comment in the book about there are some groups that do that. And I'm not, there we are.
There we are. But then she talked a lot about the Pentecostalists,
Right.
that they experience God's Spirit streaming down upon them like tongues of fire, as Luke described in Acts. And we've kind of struggled with that concept a bit in our own religion. What does that mean?
Does it,
This tongues of fire,
I remember visiting the Amana colonies years ago, and there was a little exhibit there about the religious group one of the religious groups that came and settled there, and I can't remember the name of the group, but maybe some of you Iowa folks know what I'm talking about. But They made some references to the early leader in the 1800s who also gave revelations to their little church. They may know what the name of the people is. As I was reading it, it sounded a lot like Joseph Smith in the Restoration.
It's like Amish, but it's not.
I will look.
Yeah, I don't remember the specific group, but
Yeah, it was, I don't know, just a little display of pictures that they had filming.
but lots of groups like that at that time.
Yeah.
You have the Quakers, you have the Shakers, you
Yeah.
have the
Yeah, it was kind of that.
Oneida
that
colony.
burnt, what they call it, the burnt
Burnt-over.
over district, you know, so that's kind of, but that was a very Pentecostal type of a movement. So, I'm gonna throw out my last two slides because I did pretty good here. And I would love for somebody to follow up on that. I don't remember who's after me, but the Muratorian fragment's kind of fascinating because this apparently says that, you know, the reason why people shouldn't be, you know, speaking prophecy now, and, you know, we've got all that we need is because the number of the prophets and apostles is now complete. And this is a 2nd century document that this is where it I think Irenaeus gets this from, because they have a Latin version of it, but the Greek version they say dates it back to the 2nd century. And this is where they're really starting that list of what the New Testament's going to look like. So if the number of people speaking on behalf of God is set, then there's no one else past the apostolic age, is what they're calling that. Those 12 apostles that can receive revelation directly from Jesus himself. That is the argument that Irenaeus is struggling with, you know.
Wonder if he accepted Paul.
Well, I know that was a problem. That was a problem because Paul called himself the 12th apostle.
Yeah, he just made
You know?
one.
Yeah. So this is Irenaeus's dilemma. You know, he believed in the miracles and visions. He saw one himself. His mentor was killed, and he at the same exact moment he had this vision of him being killed. You know, so he couldn't reject what the Montanists were saying, those 3 ecstatic, you know, spiritual people, but he also saw the danger in them pulling away too many people into their individual prophecy experiences. So the question for next week again, how can we tell the difference between mere human words and God's words? We don't have an answer yet.
Fabian found the information on that church in the Amana colonies. It's called the Community of True Inspiration. It was founded in Germany in the early 1700s. Originally settled in upstate New York, established 7 villages in Iowa, pushed west after the 1850s. That sounds like. After development, the community centered on people living communally and sharing ownership of land and building. That doesn't sound like the early restoration. You know what does?
I know.
It's a group that was so closely, you know, so philosophically aligned with the early Latter-day Saints.
Isn't that interesting?
A
Yeah.
lot of rabbit holes out
Well,
there.
and yeah, I mean, it really kind of tells you that, you know, I mean, to your point, you know, we do keep reinventing our questions, you know, and I mean, we wouldn't all be sitting here today if Joseph Smith didn't question all of that was going on around him, you know, I mean, because he asked God, what do you want me to do? You know, he got a personal message in the grove, which apparently there were 2 or 3 different versions of it. I learned that from Alma Blair, you know.
If you haven't taken the adult caravan, do it. Because you get to see all of those spots, not all of them, but
Yeah.
many of the spots.
Yeah, that would be cool.
What did he
The
call
Grove and
Yeah.
the Kirtland
And
Temple, obviously.
The Oneida community and,
Yeah.
and all these other communities.
I'll just never forget Amos's reaction to the Oneida.
It was the original hippie colony.
But they killed themselves off accidentally.
Right.
Yeah.
No, wait, that Shakers were killed themselves.
Oh,
off.
okay. I thought it was
They were-
Oneidas
The
too.
ones who
No,
didn't
no,
marry?
the Oneidas,
They were the opposite
Yeah.
Okay.
We love.
I can't remember. All right. Anybody remember who's teaching next week?
This is
Wait.
the voice of John, and I'm teaching.
Okay. All right.
Voice of John.
Jonathan, John, you called yourself John. The Gospel of John?
Nothing.
Seeking apostolic authority here.
Yeah, that's right, Jonathan. Are you trying to be the 12th apostle again?
There was,
No, I'm just trying to be funny.
Yeah, you're funny.
I
You
sent
got
out
it.
to some people, there's John Hamer, who is a historian and member of the church, does online lectures. And he's talking, I think it's August 9th or something like that, but also posted on the church Facebook page. He's talking about Irenaeus and the end of Gnosticism,
Oh,
his lecture. So you can, sign up, listen to it and just listen to it online. I think they call it the Center Place now. I think they changed the name.
oh, it's not,
It's not the one before. Rondo.
yeah, he's
Center with the R.
he's fascinating. He knows a lot.
Well,
I also read this weekend, one scholar has suggested that the Q gospel we talked about, the Quella, was very possibly a set of writings very similar to the Gospel of Thomas.
Oh, yeah.
In that
Oh, yeah,
it was the sayings gospel
Yeah.
about the sayings of Jesus.
exactly. Oh, yeah, a lot of scholars are saying that. I mean, I think that's why Elaine Pagels is kind of fascinated with the Gospel of Thomas, is that it was written just like the Cabal document, so interesting. So she's kind of just setting it up here for looking at the Gospel of Thomas a little differently, discern. Thanks, guys.